It's my pleasure to introduce tonight Doctors Nick Jensen and Sandra Namoff. Together, they have written a book about the wildflowers of California, which was sponsored by the California Native Plant Society. And both of them have really sterling resumes. So Nick Jensen is currently serving as the Conservation Program Director for the California Native Plant Society and is a fellow of the Switzer Foundation. In this position, he oversees conservation work of staff and volunteer advocates statewide. Nick's work involves state and federal legislative advocacy, project level work, including presiding over litigation and many other things. Nick earned his BS in Environmental Horticulture at UC Davis and completed his PhD in botany at California Botanic Gardens in Claremont. As a graduate student, Nick produced the first flora of the Tejon Ranch, documenting plant diversity on California's largest contiguous piece of private land. Moving on to Sandy, she is a consulting botanist and educator. As an adjunct professor, she teaches biology classes and hopes to inspire the next generation of California botanists. She also teaches botany workshops for the California Native Plant Society and other organizations. After completing her undergraduate degree in biology at the Florida International University, she worked at Fairchild Tropical Botanic Garden as a research assistant for their palm biology program, and she then moved out west to study calisthesia, bindweeds, at the California Botanic Garden, Claremont. During her PhD work, she traveled around California and became enamored with the flora, and thus inviting this collaboration with Dr. Jensen. So please let me turn it over to you. Here we go.
Good
Welcome.
evening. Hi.
Hello. Hi.
Thank you for joining us.
Oh, thank you. It's really a pleasure to be on here this evening to talk to the Horticultural Society, and also to kind of talk a lot about the whole botanical side of things. But as we will towards the end of the talk, we'll tie it all together back to horticulture, which is in fact, which is where I started in my love of plants, as many of us do. So many of us start in horticulture and then go on to do other things. And for me, it ended up into conservation advocacy. And I guess we'll start sharing the slides here, and I will do that now. Cool. So I'm going to get us started on this book project, which is, I guess, how it started for the California Native Plant Society. I think it was somewhere around 2019, before the world went into its great upheaval. We were approached by Timber Press, and and we'll talk a little bit more about Timber Press and their series of field guides that they've produced. We as is often the case, when someone approaches me, I say yes to things, not necessarily knowing how much work will be involved. And so we at the Native Plant Society ended up with what I learned was a very ambitious book project, The Wildflowers of California. And I'll let Sandy talk a lot about the ambition that was involved, because she did more work than anyone by an order of magnitude on this project. But let me introduce, just in case folks are not familiar with the Native Plant Society, a couple of intro slides. Where basically our mission is for people to appreciate and grow and save the flora of California, which is, as many of you probably know, is globally significant, a very special place. And we do that through things like science and education and conservation advocacy. And then, of course, making sure that people are growing them in their yards as well. Many of you in the audience, or at least some of you, are probably members. There's 13,000 of you around the state, and those folks are situated in 36 local chapters. I'm sure in the Southern California area there are several, and I don't have to tell you many of you that, I think. We have some programs. The program that I am the director of is conservation. We do advocacy for our day to day, but we have rare plant program and vegetation and horticulture program. And so, and the society does things like has plant sales where you can buy native plants. Some of the ones that Lily introduced in the intro plant section are available at some of the CNPS sales, in addition to nurseries, hikes and field trips, and all kinds of other good things. And so I'm going to pass the mic, the virtual mic, to Sandy at this point in time, and she's going to talk about the first section of this presentation, including about some intros of the other authors. So take it away, Sandy.
Hi, everyone. As Nick mentioned, the book is the author of the book is CNPS. So it's a book that, was technically written by CNPS, but it was also a huge collaboration with myself and the other writers and photographers who I'll mention, whose names I'll mention at the end or show in the end. And so I just want to mention them. So the book has 900 plant profiles in it, and I wrote about half of those. And then the other, so Julie Kerstead, she's a retired Forest Service botanist. She edited the entire book and also wrote profiles. Shauna Martinez is a retired professor, same thing. Dylan Newbyer, a consulting biologist. Bruce Homer Smith was actually a programmer who is also interested in plant education. And so he was part of the book. And then John Game is actually a retired yeast biologist from Berkeley, but he's very, very good botanist and enthusiast of the California lily. So he wrote that section. And then, of course, Nick actually wrote very few of the plant profiles, maybe 10 of
Maybe
them,
20.
maybe 20 of them, which I know he wrote while he had COVID, because that's the only time I could get him to sit down and actually write it. But he also wrote most of the introduction was largely done and kind of conceptualized by Nick. So he was a big help with that part of the book. And just to kind of bring this all together, how it came about. So Timber Press, the publisher, actually approached CNPS and said, hey, we'd really like to have a wildflower book of California. They have this whole field guide series that focuses on North America, and it's not just plants, but it's animals and mushrooms and all kinds of different books. And they had a really good collaboration with Denver Botanic Garden, where they wrote Wildflowers of the Rocky Mountains. And they kind of thought that CNPS could do the same thing. Well, we did do the same thing. So they came, Timber Press approached CNPS, and then, eventually, Nick thought he would have the time to write the book, but it turned out to be this large collaboration with all the people that I mentioned and all the photographers that I'll talk about in a bit. So I just wanted to show you what the book looks like. So you open up, it's definitely a pretty picture guide fundamentally. So you open up the book and this is what you see. So 4 plants profiled on each, 2 on each page, 4 plants per, when you open it. And just to give an idea of how what we were going for in terms of showcasing the plants visually, if you see what we did with grape soda lupin, where you kind of have a what I want to call like a profile, like a headshot almost of the plant, where you can see the whole plant and the flowers and maybe a little bit of the habitat and habit of the plant. That's kind of what we're going for, so that people can really do their best to identify species by just looking at the photos. But of course, if we had, a great shot of, like we did of sky lupin, where you actually see the plant in its full wildflower field glory, we often included those photos. But what we had with baby blue eyes, where you kind of had the plant in its, wildflower field form, but also a close-up. We try to do that so that you could both get a feel for what the plant looked like in its setting, but also what it looked like close up. And so that's kind of the perspective that we were going for when we were, choosing photos for the book. And this is kind of a close-up of what, here I just wanted to show you guys what each plant profile has in it. So every profile has what I call like your like driver's license information is what I think of it. So scientific name, plant family that the species is in, a common name, and then a little bit about kind of like the address of the plant. So, what vegetation type do you expect to find it, what elevation, and whether it's a native or non-native, because we do have non-natives in the book as well. But then so after that, we have in the profile, we have a narrative section. And this differs a little bit from a lot of wildflower books out there. So many picture guides would just have mostly have a description of morphology, but we felt like I don't want to say no botanist, but most of us don't want to sit there reading about just morphology when we're trying to learn about a plant. We want more context. So what we did to start out the plant profile was to talk about, normal things like annual or perennial and flowering time, but also just fun facts. So, if there's something interesting about the ecology of the species, or if there's something that helps you identify the species, especially relative to closely related things that you might encounter. Fun facts about the name of the species, like why it was named or what the name means. Or, how people, uses. So how have people over, throughout the world use this plant, or in California. And so that's kind of the majority of the narrative will have that kind of information. So, stuff that you would want to read about. And then lastly, we have a small section that does describe morphology. So, are you looking at a plant that's, 3 feet tall or just 22 inches, that kind of thing. Basic, leaf morphology, information about petal number, and just typical things that you would normally find in the morphology section of a plant book, and then also flower color. We also have maps in the book. These maps were done for each species. These maps were done by CNPS staff who actually took information about where the species has been collected by scientists who have made collections of the species that have then gone into basically natural history musea to document the species. So when those collections are made, a geographic point is taken, and then that's the information that we use to base these maps on. So they should reflect current collection information that we know about the plant as of, when we did those maps in 2022. So that was a very cool part of the project. And it actually didn't even take that long, because there's algorithms and programs that you can kind of just quickly plug the information into, and then it just generates them all pretty quickly. And so that was a cool part of the book, that we were able to create these kind of species distribution maps for it that I find very useful. So kind of just going back to the concept of the book and how it was, what we were thinking about when we were, sitting by ourselves during COVID, trying to think about what we as a group, this collaborative group with CNPS, there was maybe 20 or 30 people who were on the steering committee, or who would come to meetings and talk about what they, kind of wanted out of this book. And, and the goal is just to help people learn about California's flora and how to identify them. And this, obviously really melds with my interest in teaching biology. So I was, didn't necessarily think of, sit down before COVID and think, oh, I'd really like to write a wildflower book, but it just so happened that it was like a good, it melded well with, my interests and my ability at the time. So we sat down and said, with this group, we were able to identify 100 species that we felt like should be profiled in the book out of the the over 5,000 plant species in California. And again, that was a collaborative process where we created this list of 900 species. And then there was a back and forth where people said, oh, really this should be in here, or what about this? Or maybe, so that, and it was, there were certain people who was like, well, we need to include all 5,000, but that wasn't a possibility. So we were able to narrow it down to this bunch of plants. But then the other part of it was this just idea of not just wildflowers, but if a person is walking, on a hike, they've just realized that plants are awesome. And so they've picked up this book and they want to learn more about them. And they're walking down a trail and they say, what's that? It's something obvious and common, and you're going to see it along trails when you're walking around in California. We wanted that to be in the book, as well as, we didn't want to limit it to just very showy plants, because, something like trail plant, if you know this species, it certainly doesn't have a showy flower, but once it does go to fruit, it's going to stick all over your pants. You're going to notice it. It has this bright white underside to the leaf. And so we included stuff like that in the book so people could answer that question, what's that, using the book when they walk down trails in California. So of course, wildflowers, 900, the most showy ones. And when we say wildflower, we're of course talking about annuals or herbaceous perennials that are super showy, just so, bright flowers, something about them that really stands out. But again, we expanded out from that, where we have, like Joshua tree included in the book, because, hopefully if you're using this book and you pick up this book because you visited, the national park, and you want to learn more about Joshua tree, well, it's in the book. And other just very kind of indicator species for common habitats. So, toyon is included. It's going to catch people's attention if you're in the LA basin or beyond. And so, we decided to include it. And given that we were, this principle of what's along the trail, well, so much of what's along trails in California are weeds. So our non-native species, so in naturalized species. So we have included showy weeds as part of the book. So kind of moving on into a little bit how we set the book up. It's very typical, as you can imagine, you might guess, that I looked at a lot of wildflower books when we were starting this process. So we had quite a collection. Nick and I had quite a collection already, but I spent some time just, accumulating more and really looking at how people, like, what did they do in their books? What works, what doesn't? And when it came down to thinking about the organization for the book, a lot of what is usually, it's a given that you're going to order or organize a picture book by plant color, and we do that as well. But a lot of what people would do is create kind of a system for presenting the species in the book by petal number, floral symmetry, petal fusion, all these things, all these terms, characteristics of flowers that are maybe not, when I say all these terms, like, you might already be getting a little like, oh, I don't know about all that. Like, I don't know if I know how to, identify, mirror symmetry from radial symmetry, that kind of thing. And one of the authors was really, Bruce Homer Smith, he was really sensitive to that. And he just felt like we should really kind of come up with a different way to organize the book that didn't rely on, things that might be intimidating to a beginner. And and I agreed with them, but it wasn't, we had to use some system to organize it. And so what we decided on was to do what a more advanced botany book would do. And so we organized the book by color first, which is actually maybe not what a more advanced botany book would do, but then by family, genus, and species. And that seems counterintuitive for making the book more accessible to beginners. However, we came up I found this idea from a wildflower book author called Laird Blackwell, who's actually a professor in community college professor out of the Tahoe area, where in his wildflower books, he would put this photo key in the beginning. And at the very beginning, like you open up the book, you don't have to even really know what a flower is. You just, just a simple matching exercise. And you open up the book and there's all the kind of different flower forms arranged, for you to just kind of skim through quickly. And then you can go, oh, it kind of looks like the lilies. Okay, so I'm gonna go to the lilies, the orange lily section, and then find the species that I'm looking for or something similar. And so that really appealed to me. But Timber Press, who had never, so Timber Press, whereas CNPS is responsible for creating all the content and the photos and everything. Timber Press was responsible for making the book look good, doing the design, publishing it, actually printing it, getting it, into paper form, and then distributing it. And they had never done a photo key before, so they weren't sure it was something that they wanted to do. So there was some back and forth, but eventually they kind of surveyed some of their younger staff who, thought that it would be a nice thing and would help them learn plants. And so it ended up in the book, and I was super stoked because it also makes the book really useful for people who are maybe intermediate or advanced. Like I can, the book is organized the way I would expect it, the way that I would like it to be organized as a botanist. And so it makes it really nice, especially for, CNPS folks who are maybe trying to teach, lead a field trip or something. It has appeal to both very beginners and to more advanced biologists. So I was super excited about that. It's one of the things I fought for it. So in addition to, all the 900 plant profiles, we have all this information in the book to kind of just get you thinking like a botanist. So some of the things and some of the issues that are important for California botany. And so Nick's going to take it over from here and talk about some of the intro material that the book includes that's relevant.
Thank you so much, Sandy. And hopefully I'll get through this portion of the talk without coughing. I seem to have picked up a small minor cold. And so I'm trying to make sure that I don't cough too much or the dog doesn't bark too much. But one of the things that if you've thought about the native plants or the flora of California, you'll notice that there are aspects in addition to what a plant looks like, how beautiful it is, what characteristics the plant itself might have, that can help cue you in to what plant you might expect it to be, or to help you cue you into what the unknown in your hand might be. And so we spent a fair amount of time thinking about what those helpful hints might be, and a lot of that's included in the intro material in the book. This is also a great thing for you to reference. For example, when you are hanging out in your tent after a great day of viewing wildflowers, maybe you want to read a little bit more about the flora of California, about what, for example, the California floristic province is. It's a small editorial note. you as residents, assuming most of the folks in the audience are there here in California, we live in a really special place called with the exception of the desert, which is also special for its own regard. But scientists have even identified the portion of California and adjacent Oregon and Baja that is governed by a Mediterranean climate, or experiences Mediterranean climate on a yearly basis, as this place called the California Floristic Province. We talk about things like that this is an area that is considered one of the world's 36 biodiversity hotspots. So, the hope is that by maybe perusing the intro section of the book, you might gain a greater appreciation for the flora of California and how special it is from a global perspective. We include things like plant community information, or another thing is that people often call it vegetation. Essentially, what plants typically grow together. So there's this information on the various, for example, like oak woodlands versus grassland habitats. So you'll note that as you kind of begin or continue your education in the flora of California, that certain plants often grow together, and you typically won't expect a plant from the redwood forest in the Joshua Tree woodland in the desert, and vice versa, of course. So we talk about a little about the factors that are important for plants as far as their intolerances in the environment. Things like soil type and topography. Even just simply in the photo here of this grassland from the edge of the San Joaquin Valley here, you'll see that that one aspect here, the slopes are about the same steepness, but one of the areas is green while the other has already turned brown. I'm not exact. I can well, I guess I was a part of taking this photo. In fact, I think Sandy photoshopped me out of this photo. I think Sandy took this photo.
I did, and you were photoshopped out. I'm
still a little bit salty about that because I have no idea how I wouldn't have made a photo better. But anyway, the photo you can see, this is the brown hillsides are south facing, whereas the green hillsides are north facing, and you can expect certain plants on one slope and not on the other, or one aspect and not on the other. And then we talk a fair amount about things like weather and climate and all these other things that are dictating and driving where plants occur in the state. A little bit more on vegetation. We talk about the broad assemblages of plants and how they're classified by ecologists. We talk about things, the various types of habitats in California, woodlands and woodland, where there's, and define that so that you actually can understand when something is in one of the profiles. It says that it occurs in chaparral. You may not know what chaparral is, but it's defined in the intro section. It's also defined in the glossary. It's probably many of you in SoCal might have chaparral in your backyard, and so you probably don't need to. You've already learned that word, but assuming that some people who pick up this book might be from a different country even, and just are they visiting Death Valley and they go to the bookstore, and there is this cool wildflower book, and they pick it up, and they'll have the opportunity to learn about vegetation and the various assemblages of plants in California. And then, because we care so much about the flora, we also talk about threats. So there's a section in the book on kind of some of the factors that have contributed to the loss of plants and plant species and habitats. Even that we include a quote from John Muir, that talks about how different the Great Central Valley of California was in the 1800s compared to what it is now. Probably needless to say, for many of you, you probably have noted that there are not that many places left in California where you can see beautiful hillsides with a kaleidoscope of color like you see from this area of Tejon Ranch, which is a place that I had the wonderful privilege of spending a bunch of time on and seeing these beautiful displays. We know that these and the, I don't know if we use the word super bloom in the book. Maybe we do or don't. We do. Okay. I'm not sure how I feel about the word super bloom. I think all wildflower displays are super, whether or not someone considers them super blooms or not. That said, these vast displays of wildflowers were once much more common in California. In fact, there are, I think the next slide shows it. I mean, this is also a beautiful photo, right? And is included in the book. But this is this whole brown hillsides covered by annual grasses is something that is that has occurred essentially within the past 150 to 200 years. Prior to Europeans settling and making California what it is today, this would have been something, the understory here, the oaks would probably be there in the same way, but that understory and what is on the hillsides largely would have been different, probably likely more like the super bloom photo here in the in this area of Tejon Ranch. And then we also include a small section on where you might go to see wildflowers. You'll see some of the very kind of typical places for folks to see plants or go to visit wildflowers, places like Joshua Tree and the Santa Monica Mountains. This is a relatively abridged section in a way. We assume that many folks have access to the internet as well. And there's various sources, wildflower hotlines, and just websites or from around, and social media, I guess, is the big way that people find out where wildflower viewing areas are these days. And so, but we did highlight a few of these wonderful places that are kind of classic spots for folks to visit around the state. And I think it's my turn to pass it back to Sandy to talk about some of the other aspects of the intro, including a section on basic plant morphology. Go ahead, Sandy.
Yeah, so as an educator, one of the things that I care a lot about is increasing kind of the general knowledge that people have about plants. I myself can remember the first time I sat down in a college class and was really taught how plants grow. They're very simple, but they grow. They have an area of cell division at the tip of their shoots where the called the shoot apical meristem, where the plant grows out of, where the whole program for what the plant looks like is laid down. And plants all grow in a very specific way where you have buds and leaves at nodes. Those are the only place you're going to find buds and leaves, occurring. The rest is internode, and that program reiterates itself to create all the plant diversity that we see in existence. And from a horticulture perspective, that if you want to grow a plant from cutting, you better make sure that you have a lateral bud included in the cutting that you make. And so just this kind of this just basic plant knowledge that as a student of I started as a student of biology thinking maybe I would go into some kind of health profession like the rest of my family. But I started working at a botanic garden and just really kind of fell in love with it. Just the simplicity and the beauty and the diversity that is in the plant world. And so I like to share that. And so it's not this section isn't super typically found in wildflower books, but I wanted to include it where we kind of provide this baseline information about how plants grow and morphology. So going over, it is pretty typical to have like flower, all the flower parts and the different types of flowers included. And so we do that and we go into that and describe how when you want to start identifying plants, you really do need to start looking closely at petal number and floral symmetry and all those things. So all those things that I think are or could be intimidating to a beginner that I felt like shouldn't be necessary to start using the book. If you want to get good, you do need to start paying attention to all the morphology and form. And so we provide that information, but you can just pick up the book and start using it even before you get, before you start honing in on that. We also talk a little bit about systematics. So the book is organized by plant families and genus and species, which is how biologists and botanists organize biodiversity. And typically, so when you organize diversity into a plant family, what you're doing is saying that there's this, group, there's something about this larger group that helps us understand understand the species that are in that group. And so when we say a family, that's a group that usually includes, some from hundreds to thousands of species, and that they all descended from a common ancestor. So everything in that family, all the species that exist now, descended from a common ancestor that existed sometime in the history of life on the planet. So usually plant families are thought to, most plant families are thought to have arisen about, 50 to 80 million years ago. And then, now we have the extant species in that family. So what we're doing when we talk about a family is and then genus and species, we're organizing the way that we communicate. We're organizing biodiversity based on evolutionary history. And then with taxonomy, where we're talking about naming those things and nomenclature, we're hoping that we can then, make sure we're organizing and communicating about biodiversity in a way that's consistent with how species have evolved and in a way that's independent of opinion about how things should happen. It should be based on actual evolutionary history, which, because we have so much DNA evidence now that most of it has come about in the last, or for difficult groups where there was confusion, a lot of that confusion has been cleared up with DNA evidence in the last 20 to 30 years. So it's kind of a cool for me, which is what, I studied in my graduate work. It's kind of a cool thing to be able to use and to be able to talk about in the book. We also have, this is the one section that we have a section about plant families where if there's a plant family included in the book. Convolvulaceae, for example, is the group that I've worked on for my graduate work. We talk a little bit about it kind of at the worldwide level. And this is actually a section, if you asked me to cut pages, I probably would cut this section, because if you really want to learn plant families, you probably should get a resource, something like, in California, if you're interested, Glenn Keeter's Plant Families of California is a nice guide. It's older, but I have found it useful. And that's or even just online, looking up plant families online is a good way to get information. So this the rare plant section. So this is also a section of the book that wasn't, I haven't seen it in any of the other books. Any of the Timber Press Field Guide series hasn't had this, but the CNPS, the California Native Plant Society, is very strongly interested. The people who are part of the California Native Plant Society are very interested in conservation of rare species and their habitats. That's, so much of the work that Nick does is to conserve habitats for, well, really the whole flora of California, but especially rare plants. And rare plants are just such a big, it's strange because they are rare, because they, meet the characteristics of rarity, like of having fewer than, 80 occurrences or whatever. But we have a lot of the diversity of California falls into the category of rare. And it's just a big kind of motivating force for the people who are part of CNPS. And so we wanted to, bring that into this book and to also highlight the chapters that do so much work on rare plants. And so what we did was, and I think this was Nick's idea, I can't remember exactly, it was someone's idea. We invited all the chapters, so there's 36 chapters, CNPS chapters in California. We invited them to submit a rare plant for us to profile in the book, along with the work that that chapter has done to conserve that species. So like, for example, the bristlecone chapter, they submitted Dune's evening primrose, Enothera californica subspecies urgensis. And so this is a species that the chapter had worked on. They were involved with its listing in the 1970s. They would work with once the Park Service was doing protection for the species, they would go and do surveys and do weed removals in conjunction with the Park Service. And in fact, it was actually for better or for worse, and I don't know exactly how sure I feel about this, but the species was actually federally delisted in 2018 because all this work was really successful and they did a good job of protecting it. So that's kind of a cool story. And we did, and so 18 other, we did kind of 18 of these profiles for different chapters and species throughout the state. Another thing to point out about the book, it was a huge collaboration. So 7 authors, 30 people on the steering committee, and then over 60 photographers contributed to the photos that went into this book. We included over 2,200 photos. All those photos, that for every photo that we included, I largely looked at, at least a dozen other photos, sometimes 100 plus for something like a geophytum, which is so hard to take a picture of. It just looks like smoke. And so I just wanted to, so these are the top 10 photographers who contributed, and Gabby McLean and Ron Vanderhoff and Aaron Eccles are all Southern California folks that you might know. Gabby is part of the San Gabriel's Mountains chapter, so she's kind of right in your neck of the woods. And then Ron Vanderhoff is an excellent horticulturist who's at Rogers Botanic Garden for...
I don't know where Ron is. I think he might be retired.
I think he is, but I might be making that up. But anyway, I think of him as a SoCal superstar in the horticulture world. So you guys, I thought maybe some of you might know him anyway. But just, a huge thank you to all the photographers. Like I said, there's 60 of them. These are all of them that contributed photographs to the book, except for the authors who I've already mentioned. But one thing I wanted to point out here as I think the photographers is, I worked on this book for 18 months, almost straight during kind of the COVID times. And it was a huge amount of work, much more work than I thought it would be when I signed up for it. And when I actually got the proof back to look at it, I was shocked by how attractive the book was, because, writing the content and just having the photos and looking at that, I had no concept of what it would look like as a book. And I was so happy to see it and so impressed by it. And I think about that. And the reason that happened is because the photographers were so willing to contribute their photos. And because Timber Press did a great job of making it attractive. And in fact, their entire series is, all the books in the series are, they've done just an excellent job with the design. And so I was super pleased when it came out to see that. And again, thank you to every, if you're listening to this talk and you're one of the photographers, thank you so much. So many people worked on this book. We just really wanted, I wanted to dedicate it to, everyone who cares about the flora of California and who protects it and tries to promote native plants, and, to all the people in the California Native Plant Society who really make it a special organization. And me specifically, I really, when I worked on this book, I really thought about Jessica Orozco, who was a very good friend and graduate student with Nick and I when we were doing our graduate work. And, we just, almost every time I open up the book, I'm like, oh, I wish Jessica could have been here to help with it, and, would have really appreciated. So, and just all people who are interested in native plants, like, I just appreciate all of you. And, it's what kind of makes the world worth being in at some level. And so thank you. And,
We have to.
think we'll
Oh,
talk
yes.
about some fun stuff
Yeah,
now.
so I think it was a request from you, from the
From
society.
Carol,
from
yeah.
Carol,
Yeah.
to talk about a little bit about horticulture, about plants that we would love to see.
A wish list, a little wish
Just a
list.
couple. It's a wish list of 2 plants, right?
Yeah.
Well, okay,
I
so
think that's what we would have
well,
time
we
for
have,
here.
okay, so my point of origin with plants was working in my grandmother's garden, and it was not a native plant garden. It was just a classic roses and dahlias and like the things that you can grow really well in the San Francisco Bay Area. The wonderful, amenable climate to almost all things horticultural. But that was my avenue towards loving the flora of California, and then eventually fighting to protect the flora of California. And so I guess it's safe to say that there is a wonderful number of California native plants in the horticulture trade that one can go to a well-stocked nursery and buy. But that is by no means exhaustive of what could be in the trade. And when Sandy said, hey, what plant should we include in a wish list? I was like, Eriogonum. We highlighted this by any means beautiful organism called Eriogonum callistum, or Tatchy buckwheat, because it's a plant that we think very well could be a good horticultural plant. I'm not sure that it is. We did grow it a little bit at California Botanic Garden, I don't know, 7 or 8 years ago. There's a single plant, I think, in cultivation right now. It's at the East Bay Regional Parks Botanic Garden at Pilden. Bart O'Brien has one plant that we gave to him. But that said, it's probably a more of a collector's plant because it needs really good drainage. It occurs
until we get it growing.
Well, it needs really good drainage so far as we can tell. Probably a rock garden plant, really. But in general, let me say, our native buckwheats are underrepresented in the horticulture trade. You can go to a native plant sale or a native plant nursery and buy, I don't know, somewhere between 5 and 10 different species, maybe. If you're lucky, it might be more like 2 or 3. But I would love to see pretty much all of the buckwheats that are as many as possible in the trade. That's my first editorial note. More buckwheats, as is the common phrase. I don't think that's a common phrase, is it? No, it could become.
There is a buckwheat society.
There's a buckwheat society.
Okay, so then for my wish list plant, so I just love penstemons. And my perspective for thinking about this is, if let's say you're just trying to dip your toe into incorporating more native plants into your garden, whatever type of garden you have. I mean, penstemons, you really can't beat them. They can die on you, sure, any plant can, but in general, they're not the hardest to grow. They have beautiful flowers. The vegetation is relatively attractive for much of the year, even when they're not flowering. Like, I think I moved to California in 2010, and I would say by 2011, I had a strong case of penstemania. I just didn't realize that there was such a great group of, and I remember it was the first year that Penstemon spectabilis just took over the entire coastal sage scrub area of California Botanic Garden and their back communities area. It was just like a sea of gorgeous flowers. And I just, I was done. I was hooked. So, anyway, this one, Penstemon newberrii, variety sonomensis, is, it's a species that, so typical Penstemon newberrii is high elevation, montane, rocky, probably, and it's difficult to get it to grow at lower elevations like Sacramento or where most of us live at lower elevations. And so this variety occurs in the Coast Range and often at lower elevations down to 500 feet. So while it is available, we were able to get it from California Flora Nursery. It's not super widely available, but I'm hoping that it does well at lower elevations. And we've already started to give it to a few really good growers to see if we can get it, out there. And it kind of has a different flower color than the typical newberrii. It's a little bit redder and less pink. Oh yeah, and this is it growing in habitat, I think.
With the dendromecon.
With the dendromecon, yeah, with not the same one that Lily just showed earlier in this slide. This is rigida, the more like coastal foothill type thing. And so wouldn't you want this in your garden? I know I do.
How often nature is kind of the best gardener, isn't it?
Yeah.
Look at that. Perfect.
I know. What do you need?
Been planted,
I
right?
know.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and then this is just a quick shout out for the CNP, the California Native Plant Society, has kind of revamped their CalScape website, where it's a place that you can, start exploring. You can literally just type in your address and find a list of plants that are locally site appropriate. And then it also links to nurseries that may have that plant. Either that they've had them in the past or maybe seeds or something like that. So it's a really good resource if you're trying to, if you're really just diving into native plants for the first time. CNPS just revamped the website, so it's different. And if you haven't been on it in a while, it's different and hopefully more useful than it was in the past. So I just wanted to point that out, and just to thank you all for listening and enjoying
now
wildflowers.
you know how to contact us if you
if you have any questions or
or you want to get involved in some conservation advocacy work or anything like that, or you just want to share something cool about a native plant. I always love to hear from folks, so please do email us. And I guess we can stop sharing because I think maybe there's questions. These virtual presentations are a little bit difficult to read the room because there's no room to read. So go ahead and let's look at the chat. Any questions? Oh, hi, Orchid.
We did have a question earlier. Alfred H. was curious as to what percentage of plants in the book are not native.
I don't know. I could.
I kind of think it's around 10%.
No,
no more.
High. Not that high. No, the answer is we don't know.
Good question.
That is a good. I could find that out.
Start counting.
If I had my computer, I could do a quick sort by native. But it's really we really try to think about which non-natives would people, like mustards along the trail, Brassica nigra, Hirschfeldia, how to tell the two apart if that's something that interests you, that kind of thing. So just really common stuff where it's yellow star thistle if you're up in the foothill area, what is this horrendous plant that you can't walk through? That kind of thing, all the brooms and stuff, which can be very beautiful. And kind of especially that intersection between horticulture and many of our escaped plants did come from horticulture, you know, so just kind of like, you know, and you can still buy Spanish broom, I think, in some places, or French broom. And so just to
Wish that wasn't the case.
educate people about, like, don't plant this thing. It's, you know, problematic.
Yeah, so just to clarify, for it's the field guide to wildflowers, but you guys aren't talking about just annuals. You're talking about anything that
No.
you're walking through, you're hiking somewhere and you see this gorgeous flower, you're like, oh, what is that? So this
What
is
is that?
kind of the
I
post,
think,
yeah.
I think like, so there are certainly probably people in the audience who are more advanced than others, but the idea is that the person who just picks up this book at a visitor center isn't going to be like, oh, what's that plant? Oh, I guess it's not in this book because it's because it's not
a wildflower.
It's not a
or whatever.
wildflower in the classic sense. We did think about
Restricting it in that way.
we did think about that, and there was a lot of debate as to what the bounds would be. But then we resolved into this, I would say, this kind of, I don't know if I don't think it's completely unique to this book. I think a lot of wildflower books do include non-natives and some shrubs.
So what if we had gone another way where we included less diversity, but more of like the genera that have, you know, just like the lilies and the phacelias and we could have included more species of those common those wildflower, typical wildflower type things. But I feel like there's more learning value in having more diversity, because once you kind of get hooked in and you can identify, certain, plant groups, phacelias, penstemons, etc., you can then start using online resources, Jepson Manual and other resources where you can really get into what exactly each species is. And so that's I think how I have learned plants, unlike Nick, where he just looks at a plant and he knows it forever. Whereas I've had to really learn by learning the genera, learning the major groups. And I thought the way the diversity that we included in the book kind of reflects that, I think, in a way that made sense to me, for better or for worse. And
I'm seeing a juicy question in the chat. Do we consider plants that are cultivars of native plants a native plant?
Well,
I think so.
Wildflowers of California doesn't really touch on that, but Nick certainly has a lot of opinions.
I guess
I would say yes.
I mean, essentially, it's a selection of a native species. I think it's still a native species. We in our garden we grow some cultivars. A lot of them are species. I think the question becomes a lot more probably poignant if you are doing like restoration work.
Yeah,
I would say probably not. You wouldn't want to plant some selection of that's like Monardella or something in a restoration site. But for your regular suburban garden, sure. I mean, and it all just, I think it all depends on what the aim is in a way. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, thank you, Carol. Like, yeah, many are just selections from the wild. I mean, and some of them are just like really good garden plants.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess we're growing. I mean, we do it. Sometimes we're doing both. Like we have straight species, Eriogonum nudum or naked buckwheat. We have straight species, the straight species in our yard, but we're also growing this plant called Ella Nelson's Gold, which is just it's not native to Sacramento by any means or anywhere close by. I think it's from like the Sonoma coast or something like that, from a much cooler climate. But that's a fabulous plant, for a garden. And so I guess is it native to Sacramento? No. Is it native to California? Yeah, it's a selection from the wild. I don't. I think it's at some level it's up to everyone to. Yeah, right. Thanks. Okay. No one ever grew roses was only the species with a single. Although those are wonderful too, but yeah, like most people wouldn't grow them. Yeah, I think it's. I think part of it is just to. Oh yeah, good question. Tim would be great to grow the Eriogonum. So I have some seeds of the Callistum, the Eriogonum. And my hope is that we'll be able to produce some plants and then maybe to give them to some people like Tim,
Get him more past
get
that.
them, I would love to get into the trade.
I should mention that Nick collected these seeds originally as part of his dissertation work, conservation work that he did. And then they were seed banked at ranches at California.
Cal BG.
And now this is kind of Nick's pet project
It's
to
kind
get
of
it
growing.
out.
I mean, I don't have very many seeds. So if I can get plants going, then we'll start distributing them. And then maybe, like I said, I don't think the Eriogonum callistum or Tatchby buckwheat will ever be, I doubt that
Who
it's going to
knows?
be sold at Home Depot. I think it's just a little bit too difficult, but I bet you the folks in this audience today could grow it if you made the right drainage choice. We've gotten quite in our yard, into putting in rock gardens and / crevice gardens. Yeah, Carol, I would love to give you a plant. So maybe you have my email address. I know many of you already had it. Some of you already had it. And more of you do now. If you're interested in anything that we've talked about tonight, just send me an email and maybe we'll get it going. And if it's hard for some, maybe somebody will figure it out.
Well, I was wondering, you had said something about you have the rarities section in the book, but do the other plants have like a rarity rating? Just because I have been the person sitting there on a trail with the book, like going through all the white flowers to try to identify the thing in front of me.
Right. So in general, the 900 main profiles are things that are not rare generally, because when we chose those 900, we were trying to maximize geographic breadth. So like things that are super common all over the state, or common in SoCal or common in NorCal or common on the coast or very common in the desert. So very common was always something that we were trying for.
Well, and I will say at one point when we started this project, we were both living in, we lived together, we're married. We were living in SoCal where we did our grad work. And so we got accused of the book being too Southern California focused at some point in time, the species list. And so we had one of the hardest things was to choose the plants in the book.
At the same time, the flora of California is more species rich than Southern California. So even if you're sampling, even if you could somehow do that, you would still have a Southern California heavy.
Well, and arguably
selection.
Some of the better wildflower viewing areas.
You have the desert
state.
Areas, Carrizo Plain.
Which I don't quote me in that. I don't want to get in trouble with with the folks from NorCal.
But we did have so the editor, she's Northern California, so she added a few taxa in that, she's like, how do you not have this? I'm like, because I don't know what it is, because I'm more so.
Well, and
SoCal.
Sandy had to remove a lot of the things I put in that I just thought were cool.
Yeah, he would just put in like I don't even know.
There's no good examples.
I can't think off the.
She'd be like, what is this? I'm like, it's really cool. She's like, but nobody's gonna see.
I'm like,
this
I don't
thing.
even. It'd be some genus in the Asteraceae that I'd never even heard of, and I'm just like,
where it only lives in one little area.
Yeah, and you're just like, he's like, but I like it. I'm like, no. So there was a lot of that where I just, but that was kind of early on in the process before more of the people had seen the list. So
she wants the email. I can put my email in here.
Yeah, I was gonna say with 900 plant profiles, I wonder, what you guys had to leave out.
A lot.
And actually, it went from Timber Press kind of changed the format of how they do their books midway on us. So we were originally told that we had 1,200 profiles, taxa that we could include in the book. And then pretty early on in the process, maybe like 6 months into the writing, they were like, just kidding. We want to only have 900 in it. And at that point, I'd maybe written like a quarter of the profiles, and I was already exhausted with writing it. So
on how
900's fine,
A question on how the book is selling. Well, okay, so ultimately, it's Timber Press's
we don't know
charge to sell this thing. They've printed 10,000 of them, and but we are, of course, CNPS is selling them. We've been giving them away as gifts. Our chapters have been buying them in by the box load, and I've heard from some chapters that they're selling them quite quickly. So I guess we'll see. It's a good question, actually. We could approach Timber Press and ask
we
how
could,
they're doing. And then we'll really find out if they say, well, we want to do a second printing, and then we'll say, then we'll really know that it's been selling well.
Yeah. And along those lines, also, if there's any like errors or
Oh yeah, we want to
anything,
hear about errors.
yeah, we want to hear
We haven't
about
heard
errors,
nearly enough about errors.
which
that
there must be.
there have to be errors in this book. So if you
find anything weird, let us
please
know.
like don't be afraid. Like we want
to make it better.
we
if
didn't think
ever-
it was perfect when we wrote it, and we haven't heard a lot of people complaining about things.
Which means it means either no one's read it very carefully yet, or there aren't any. But I think probably
That now we've jinxed
Yeah,
ourselves. There's
anyway.
there's people in the audience who have written books. So
yeah.
so
But first editions are always difficult, and or just have they're just first editions. So
Well, we're going to give everybody who's still here a chance to win a copy of your book.
Cool.
So, and
Yay.
we'll
Awesome,
purchase
yeah.
it from CNPS or from Timber Press. And I also did want to ask, so a lot of the CNPS chapters have like rare plant hikes and stuff, right?
yeah.
Just want to give that as a shout out. Also, as a good way to learn about our native plants is to find your local CNPS chapter, and they lead hikes. And they also do like treasure hunts. Is that? I can't remember. I haven't been on one.
Some of the chapters will do like
Rare plant-
searches for rare plants, and you can there's often programs like these monthly programs.
I looked at your website, and and then I was fiddling around on CNPS's website. It's very similar kind of programming.
And then plant
talks.
sales are pretty awesome. Like we've made good use of our local native plant sales, and even like I'll go in and I'll go peep around on on the chapters around the state to see if there's cool plants that I want to grow. And we had a friend buy some plants from the bristlecone chapter that I thought were just super cool.
We got Stanley.
Like Stanleya.
Yeah.
Like you're gonna get into the nerd zone of things, Stanleya.
Yeah, it was cool.
That's a good idea. Yeah.
Carol says, I suggest giving copies to all of California state senators and assembly members, and of course the governor. We had to fight plant blindness, right?
Absolutely. It's also a good idea, and I am not to be too editorial here. I'm just happy we do live in California.
Yep.
Oh yeah. They have Stanley in their demonstration garden. It's a cool plant. I don't know why it's not growing more.
I've actually seen it here in Ventura County, so it's
cool.
Got a pretty wide spread. But anyway, aside from nerding out on plants, which we could go on for hours.
Yeah, like this is like we're like definitely in the point of the night where we can just talk about plants all night, which I would like to do actually.
We've got a couple more votes for nerding out on plants, but I think we do need to move on and try to give away a copy of your book.
Okay, yeah, please do.
Thank you so much.
And if anybody else has more questions, Nick just put his email up there. And so thank you all for attending tonight. And our next meeting will be on December 12th. Also, please check our website for information about the Southern California Horticulture Society, and also about donating to victims of the mountain fire. All right. Thank you all, and
Thank you, everyone.
good night.